The crystal chandelier bathed the Fairmont Olympic Ballroom in warm light as my brother Jake lifted his champagne glass, ready to give what was clearly another self-congratulatory speech. I sat at table 8. Not beside him. Not with family. Just placed there. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Sarah and me," Jake began, his voice smooth and confident, the kind that came from never being challenged. "It means everything to have our families and closest friends here." Sarah stood beside him, glowing in her designer gown, every bit the perfect corporate wife. They'd met at his consulting firm, two rising stars in Seattle's business world. "Looking out at all of you," Jake continued, scanning the room filled with executives, lawyers, and finance people, "I'm reminded how lucky we are to be surrounded by such accomplished individuals. Real achievers. Real professionals." I took a slow sip of wine and glanced at my phone under the table. A message from my CTO. Q3 results just dropped. Revenue up 340%. User growth beyond projections. Tomorrow's board meeting would cover acquisitions. 3 companies already lined up. One of them. I glanced around the room again. Yeah. They were here tonight. Of course, Jake went on, his tone shifting into something I knew too well. Not everyone in our family followed the traditional path. A few people chuckled. I felt the room subtly turn toward me. There was my little sister, Riley, he said, smiling like this was harmless fun, has always been creative. More quiet laughter. While I was building my career in corporate consulting, she was busy playing with computers, making little apps and websites. Even Uncle David smiled like it was some inside joke. I kept my face neutral. "Hey," Jake said, lifting his glass again, "at least I chose a real career. One that can actually support a family and contribute something meaningful." Applause filled the room. People nodded, impressed. Jake, the golden success story. I clapped along, calm, steady. My phone buzzed again. Goldman Sachs, requesting another meeting about our IPO. Microsoft, revised partnership terms. Riley's doing her best with her little computer hobby, Jake added, almost as an afterthought. Maybe one day she'll find something stable. Something that actually makes money. Dad nodded, proud of him. Sympathetic toward me. But enough about family charity cases, Jake laughed. Tonight is about real success, real achievements, and real love. More applause. More smiles. And as he moved on to romantic stories about Sarah, I quietly opened the latest valuation report on my phone. Then I stopped for a second. And smiled. Because the little apps he was laughing about, they were about to buy companies sitting in this very room. Select Solutions, my little app company, had just closed our Series D funding and was now valued at $2.3 billion. Our productivity platform served 847 Fortune 500 companies and employed 1,200 people across 14 countries. I sat quietly, scanning the ballroom, when the guest next to me, a distinguished older man I didn't recognize, leaned in. "Excuse me, did you say something about an app?" "Oh, nothing important," I said lightly, "just work stuff." He studied me. "You look familiar. Do you work in tech?" "I run a small software company," I said automatically. "Interesting. What kind of software?" Before I could answer, Jake's voice rose to the crescendo of his speech. Another toast to real careers, real success, followed by enthusiastic applause. As guests settled back into their seats, the man extended his hand. "I'm sorry, I don't think we were properly introduced. Robert Chin, CEO of Morrison & Associates." My stomach sank. Morrison & Associates, Jake's consulting firm, the very company on our acquisition target list for tomorrow's board meeting. "Riley Martinez I manage," I said. "Martinez?" "Jake's sister. The one who works with computers." Robert's eyes narrowed. "What did you say your company was called?" I hesitated. "Select Solutions." Robert froze. "Select Solutions? The Select Solutions? You know the company." His fingers trembled slightly as he set down his wine glass. "We've been trying to land Syntech as a client for 2 years. Your platform revolutionized productivity management." "Riley Martinez." I nodded. "But Jake," Robert said, "he thinks you make little apps?" I nodded again. "Yes. That's what he says." Robert's eyes widened. "Riley, your company is worth more than my entire firm. Your Q2 revenue, $847 million. And Jake thinks you make little apps. He does, I said softly. Mr. Chin, what exactly has Jake told you about my work? Robert repeated Jake's words almost verbatim. You play around with computers, build small websites for local businesses, struggling to find stable employment. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I was struggling, I murmured. Robert shook his head. Last month he asked if Morrison ever needed basic IT support. Said his sister was good with computers and might be available for small projects. The humiliation hit me in waves. Jake had been trying to get me pity work from the same company we were about to approach for acquisition. Robert scrolled through his phone, eyes widening. Your Series D funding last month. Valuation $2.3 billion. I showed him our quarterly report. We're evaluating potential acquisitions, companies that could benefit from integration with our platform. Robert's face went pale as I swiped to our acquisition list. Third one down, Morrison & Associates. $180 million preliminary offer. You're buying my company, he said weakly. We're considering it, I said. And Jake has no idea? No idea, I confirmed. Robert excused himself to make a call, leaving me to process the moment. Meanwhile, Jake kept talking, this time about my awkward teenage years. Riley was always the weird one, he said with condescending nostalgia. While other kids played sports, she was locked in her room, talking about changing the world with technology. Laughter rippled through the crowd. We told her to be realistic, to focus on practical skills. But kids and their impossible dreams. I quietly pulled up our employee directory, 1,200 names of people whose livelihoods depended on the company he mocked as a hobby. Well, Jake continued, smiling indulgently at Mom, Riley always thought she'd be some big tech entrepreneur. Build the next Google or something. We can't all be tech billionaires, right? Some of us have to do real work in the real world. My phone buzzed. Wall Street Journal wanted to move up the IPO interview. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. stock projections better than expected. Robert returned looking shell-shocked. I just spoke with our board chair. Emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Everything okay, Riley? I gestured toward Jake, still narrating his carefully curated childhood tales. Is this acquisition friendly or hostile? We prefer friendly, Robert said. But if Jake complicates things, he's been positioning himself as a rising star. The board's considering him for executive track, partly based on his tech expertise. Based on family connections, he's mentioned his sister works in tech and could help with digital transformation. I smiled, letting the weight of the irony sink in. All those years of condescension, all the little app jokes. And now Jake's supposed expertise relied entirely on the very company he belittled. The moment was delicious. And entirely mine. The irony was suffocating. Jake had been riding my supposed tech expertise for years, all while mocking it at every family gathering. What exactly has he told your board about me? I asked Robert. He said you work as a freelance web developer, Robert replied. That you'd started a small business but it was struggling to scale. Based on that, your board thinks Jake has insider knowledge. He's been confidently advising them on digital transformation strategies. At the head table, Jake had been explaining how Morrison & Associates could leverage emerging technologies, his tone polished and authoritative, entirely thanks to family connections. Mr. Chin, I asked, what happens to Jake's position if the board learns his supposed insider is actually the CEO of the company acquiring you? Robert nodded slowly. The optics would be complicated, especially if they realized he's been completely wrong about his insider's expertise. Monday's board meeting, I continued. Jake is scheduled to present his strategic vision for tech sector expansion, based on this insider knowledge. Would you mind if I attended? As who? As the CEO of Surrec Solutions discussing acquisition terms. Robert's smile was slow but genuine. I think that could be arranged. Monday morning I stood outside Morrison & Associates' downtown offices with Jennifer Walsh, my head of M&A. The building was smaller than I expected. Understated elegance that screamed tradition over innovation. The conference room dominated the top floor, 8 board members seated around a polished table as Robert made introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, I'd like to introduce Riley Martinez, CEO of Surrec Solutions, and Jennifer Walsh, Head of Mergers and Acquisitions. Respectful attention circled the room. People about to receive very large checks. Before we begin, Dorothy Harrison, the board chair, announced, Jake Martinez will present his strategic vision for our tech sector expansion. Jake entered confidently, tablet in hand, ready to impress with his industry insights. He froze when he saw me. Riley, what are you doing here? I'm here to discuss the potential acquisition of Morrison & Associates by Surex Solutions, I said evenly. He blinked, confused. But I'm supposed to present our growth strategy. Dorothy consulted her notes. Jake, you're scheduled to share your vision for leveraging tech industry connections. You mentioned insider access through family connections. Jake's face drained of color. Perfect timing, Dorothy continued. Since your sister is apparently a tech executive, she can provide context. Actually, Robert interjected, there might be some confusion about Riley's role in tech. Jake described her as a freelance web developer who could provide basic insights. Jennifer slid documents across the table. Surex Solutions quarterly report, complete with revenue, client base and market position. The board's eyes scanned the numbers. $847 million in quarterly revenue, a market capitalization of $2.3 billion. This shows Surex is one of the largest enterprise software companies in North America, said board member Patricia Wong. That's correct, I confirmed. And you're the founder and CEO? Also correct. All eyes turned to Jake, frozen like a deer in headlights. Jake, Dorothy said slowly, you told us your sister was a struggling freelance web developer. Jake's mouth opened, no sound coming out. You said she was barely making ends meet with small projects, I pressed. I thought, he stammered. I thought what? I thought you were just playing around with computers making little websites. Mom said you were having trouble finding stable work. When did Mom say that? 3 years ago when you quit Microsoft. I quit Microsoft to start my own business, I said. You assumed freelance work. Dorothy flipped through our quarterly report in awe. Miss Martinez, these numbers are extraordinary. Jennifer slid the acquisition documents across the table. Terms, retention packages, integration timeline. Jake finally found his voice. You're buying the company I work for. Yes, I said evenly, but please go ahead. I'd love to hear your tech industry insights. Jake looked around at 8 expectant faces. His carefully prepared presentation suddenly meaningless with a real tech billionaire sitting right next to him. I don't think I have anything meaningful to add, he muttered. Dorothy turned to our documents. Miss Martinez, this offer is generous. Why Morrison & Associates specifically? Excellent client relationships in manufacturing which align with our expansion strategy, I said. Your corporate culture appears to value innovation. This acquisition is a strategic fit. Jake slumped slightly, the full weight of irony pressing down. He had spent years belittling my work, and now his own career advice rested entirely on the company he never truly understood. I glanced at Jake. That assessment, I said, was based on external research. This morning's revelations about internal assumptions have been illuminating. In what way? Some of your rising talent, I said, may have been overstating their industry expertise. Jake swallowed, miserable. Jake, Dorothy said carefully, you've been positioning yourself as having insider tech access. I thought I did, he admitted. Based on what? Riley, working with computers. Did you ever ask her for those insights? No. Did you ever ask about the specifics of her work? No. So, I said, your claimed expertise was based on assumptions you never verified. Jake nodded silently, the weight of it sinking in. Patricia looked up from the acquisition terms. Does this change your interest in acquiring Morrison & Associates? That depends, I said, on whether Morrison & Associates is committed to accuracy in client communications and strategic planning. 6 weeks later, the Surex acquisition of Morrison & Associates was finalized for $195 million. Jake kept his job, but his trajectory toward executive leadership quietly evaporated. He now reports to Jennifer Walsh, who heads our new consulting division. At Thanksgiving 2 months later, the family dynamic had shifted. Mom peppered me with questions about Surex's corporate culture. Dad wanted to understand our acquisition strategy. Jake was quieter, more thoughtful. How are you adjusting to the acquisition? I asked as we cleared dishes. It's been humbling, he admitted. Working for you, seeing how you actually run things. Different from what I expected, different from what I assumed. He paused. Riley, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For talking about your work like it was a hobby. For making assumptions instead of asking questions. For trying to use family connections without understanding what those connections actually were. And for being embarrassed by you when I should have been proud. Why were you embarrassed? I asked. Because your success didn't look like what I thought success should look like. You didn't have the corporate job, the fancy office, the traditional markers. So I assumed you were failing when actually, you were building something bigger than any corporate job. Bigger than I could imagine. We worked in silence for a few moments. The comfortable rhythm of siblings who had done dishes together countless times. Jake, what are you going to do now? Learn. Work hard. Try to actually earn the position I thought I deserved. And stop making assumptions about people's lives. Definitely stop making assumptions, I said. My phone buzzed. A notification from our team. The IPO filing was moving forward ahead of schedule, with initial market response exceeding projections. I showed Jake the message. How much will Surrec be worth after the IPO? Conservative estimates put us around $8 billion. Jake whistled. $8 billion, and I was trying to get you freelance web development projects. The irony isn't lost on me. I really am an idiot. You're not an idiot, I said. You just learned the difference between assumptions and reality. Expensive lesson. The best ones usually are, he admitted, shaking his head.